Welcome everyone tuning in either live or after our recording, and thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time, Sharks for Kids is an educational platform where our goal is to create a new generation of shark advocates through access to a dynamic range of educational materials. We have tons of resources and material on our website, sharksforkids.com. That's for those interested, and also for maybe teachers or parents that want some curriculum. It's all right there. It has the lesson plan and webinars and PowerPoints and like worksheets and those types of things for you. My name is Dr. Annie Hensel. I am a science advisor and ambassador here at Sharks for Kids. And I am a marine ecologist joining today from the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. I'm hosting Jessica Pate, a senior researcher at Marine Megafauna Foundation. And that's where their work focuses on saving threatened marine life using pioneering research, education, and sustainable conservation solutions. It's a really good mixture to help thrive with manta rays. While Jessica is presenting, I encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A chat box, where I will ask those questions to Jessica or maybe answer them during. And I have two questions for those that are here live to go ahead and put in that answer box for us. And the first question is, how large do you think a manta ray can get in its entire life? And then the second question is, how big do you think, or small do you think they are when they're born? So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll let you take over.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much to Sharks for Kids for having me. Today, I'm going to tell you about manta rays. We're going to talk a little bit about general manta ray biology, why I think they're the coolest animals and why I think you should think they're the coolest animals. And then I'll talk a little bit about myself and how I got to where I am now, and a little bit about my specific research on manta rays here in Florida. So what I want to go over first is one of the most common misconceptions I get when I tell people I study manta rays. A lot of time they think I'm talking about a stingray. So I want to talk to you about the difference between a manta ray and a stingray, because they're quite different. So stingrays have adapted for a life that's lived on the sand. So they're living all of their life right on the seafloor, and their body plan shows this. So when you're living on the floor, on the sand of the ocean bottom, you need eyes on top of your head. And this helps you see predators coming from above and keep a lookout. Also, they have their gills on the bottom of their bodies. So while they're lying in their sand, the gills are right over their sand. So they have these specialized structures behind their eyes that are called spiracles, and this lets them pump water over their gills while they're laying in the sand. They also have a stinging barb on their tail. So if a predator tries to attack them from above, they can flip that tail up and put a barb in it. So that helps them protect from predators. And their mouth is underneath their body. So they're always feeding things out of the sand, like little fish and crabs and things. Manta rays are adapted for a life in the ocean and in the water column. They're always swimming. They have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So they can't just stop and rest on the sand like stingrays do. And since they're always swimming in the water column, they have eyes that are out on the sides of their heads. So this lets them see above them and below them. They have a mouth that, instead of being underneath their body, is in front of their body. And we'll talk about their feeding in just a second. And they don't have a stinging barb like stingrays, so they cannot hurt you in any way. Manta rays are the gentlest of creatures. So this is a manta ray, and one thing manta rays are known for is being really big. So I don't know if anyone has a chance to answer that question yet. Do you guys know how big a Manta Ray can get? Annie, do we have?
We have had one person go ahead and try to answer this for us. And that is Water Witch with Frida, I think in Maryland, perhaps. It has MD. But and I apologize if I have that wrong, but the guess is 12 foot for full grown. And would you like the smallest one now as well?
We'll go to that later.
Okay. Yeah. So 12 foot full grown was their guess.
12 foot. So they can actually get about double that size.
Holy smokes.
Really, really big. And when we measure a manta ray, we're measuring it from one tip of the wing to the other tip of the wing. And you can see this diver right here, if you just look at the size of her arm, it's about the size of the manta ray's, just the manta ray's pelvic fin. So the biggest manta rays can get very, very large. They're the largest rays in the ocean. And manta rays, as a lot of you shark people probably know already, are from a group called elasmobranchs. And one of the things elasmobranchs have in common is that they have skeletons that are made out of cartilage. So if you touch the end of your nose and it's all squishy, that's the same thing that a manta ray skeleton is made out of, which is great because cartilage is lighter than bone. So it helps them be more buoyant. It helps them be more flexible. But one thing it doesn't do very well is it doesn't preserve. So it's very rare to see a manta ray skeleton like this because cartilage decomposes really fast and doesn't make fossils. But what does fossilize is manta ray teeth. So manta rays have a single band of teeth on their lower jaw, and they're very, 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 very small. They're like 1 millimeter across. So they're very, very tiny. They don't use these teeth for feeding. And what these teeth are made of is very similar to what our human teeth are made out of. They're dentine. So they actually do fossilize. And based on these fossilized teeth that have been found, they've managed to date manta rays and figure that manta rays as a group are about 5 million years old, which when you hear 5 million years old, you think, whoa, that's really, really old. But if you look at the whole group of sharks and rays, the elasmobranchs, they've been around for about 400 million years. So manta rays are actually the most recently evolved of all the rays in the elasmobranchs. So they're kind of the newest sharks and rays to the ocean, which is really cool. And so manta rays are filter feeders. I showed you that they do have those really tiny teeth, but they do not use them for feeding. And one of the most characteristic features of manta rays are these fins that come out in front of their face. And the fancy term for that is their cephalic fins, and cephalic just means head. So they have these two fins that come out of their face, and they unroll them, which allows them to filter or funnel water into their mouth. And what the water has in it are these tiny little creatures or animals called plankton. So there's plankton like copepods and small shrimps and crabs and sometimes small fish. And what the manta rays do is they have their cephalic fins open, their mouth wide open, and they swim through the water that's full of plankton. And when they do that, they have these structures in their gills called gill rakers, and the plankton gets trapped in these little structures. So they're swimming through the water, their gills get full of plankton and the water gets flushed out. And when their gills are all nice and full of plankton, they swallow, and that's how they eat. So that's their esophagus if you look straight back there. So manta rays are some of the biggest creatures in the ocean, but they're feeding on some of the smallest animals. It's a very similar feeding strategy to whale sharks and large whales. Here's a little video. When they're done feeding, they can roll up their cephalic fins like that. And actually, one of our researchers at MMF just came out with a paper last week looking into how manta rays may use their cephalic fins to communicate with each other, or possibly to communicate to other fish for cleaning. So there's a lot more about how they use their cephalic fins that we really don't understand yet.
Wow. May I ask a quick question about that? What is the hypothesis for why they roll them up when they're done feeding?
It's to make them more hydrodynamic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when they're like this, and it's why they're called devil rays in a lot of places, because when they're rolled up, they look like devil horns. But yeah, so they're tucked up and out of the way.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Uh-huh. And now we're going to look at a couple different kinds of feeding behavior. I have a video here. So manta rays exhibit a lot of different feeding strategies. Sometimes they'll feed alone on the surface of the water. You can see their fins coming out. Sometimes they'll feed right along the bottom. They're still not really feeding in the sand, but maybe little plankton that are coming out of the sand. When they get in an area with a lot of plankton, they'll do this barrel roll feeding where they basically make flips to get all the yummy plankton in their mouth. Whee! And then they can also feed in groups. Sometimes they'll feed right on top of each other, like this, piggyback feeding. And that's so that if the little plankton tries to get away from the lower manta, it gets into the upper manta's mouth. And then there's a place in the Maldives where you'll see this behavior called cyclone feeding, where hundreds of mantas will get together and basically make a tornado of manta rays. And they do this when there's lots and lots of plankton in the water. And they'll basically just make a vortex of all the food. You can see they all have their mouths wide open and their cephalic fins unrolled. And I personally have never seen this behavior, but I'm dying to. So manta rays have a pretty conservative lifestyle, which means they reproduce very slowly. They have a late age of maturity. In females, it's probably around 8 to 10 years. So it takes them a long while before they're ready to have babies. And then they're pregnant for a very long time. Manta rays are pregnant for an entire year. So that's longer than even humans are pregnant. We're only pregnant for 9 months. So they're carrying around a baby for a very long time. And this is what a pregnant manta ray looks like. They'll have, their belly and back will be swollen. And when a manta ray is in utero, its wingtips are folded up over its back, or else they wouldn't fit in the manta ray's womb or uterus. So they're rolled up like a little manta ray burrito. And when they're born, they open up their wings and fly, basically. So they have a long gestation period, and have a very low fecundity, which fecundity is just a fancy word for how many babies you're having. So they have one offspring at a time, and they have one quite large offspring at a time. So I don't know if anyone has made a guess about how big a baby manta ray is.
From Waterwitch, the guess was 12 inches. And I now am in love with the statement, a manta ray burrito. That's the cutest thing I've ever heard of. But yeah, 12 inches is the guess.
All right, that's a good guess. And that's what a lot of people think. But they're pretty big. Manta rays are born at around 5 to 6 feet across. And what's weird is no scientist or no one has ever witnessed a manta ray birth in the wild. So no one knows where manta rays are giving birth. The only place this has been recorded is at an aquarium in Japan, where they've had about 7 or 8 manta ray babies, and they've actually been to measure the newborns. And some of them have been 1.8 meters, which is 6 feet across.
Wow. Well, I guess that makes sense why they look like such, so thick, even though they can be 25 feet, long. Yeah. They have a 6-foot baby.
Yeah, so the moms are putting in tons of energy into making this one offspring, and they don't take care of the baby once it's born. The mom has done all the work she can. This baby is born, it's big, and it's ready to go and fend for itself. And since it takes so much energy, they usually take a couple years off between pregnancies. And so what this means is that manta rays probably aren't having very many babies over their lifetime. If we do some math, if they mature at 10 years old and live till we think they live to around 40 or 50 years old, and then take 2 to 5 years between each baby, they're having less than 10 offspring in their entire lifetime. So this is a very, very slow way to reproduce. And here's one of my favorite videos. I love when manta rays do this. Sometimes when I get in the water with them, manta rays will be very curious and they'll flip upside down where they can see you better. And basically are just kind of checking you out, looking at what that weird thing that doesn't swim very well is. And fun fact, manta rays have the largest brain of any fish. So they don't just have a big brain because they're a big animal. They have a big brain for being a big animal. It's big relative to their body size. So we think manta rays are pretty smart. And the reason they have this big brain probably has to do with they have very social lives, like you saw in those feeding videos. They work together to feed, and social animals like humans tend to have large brains. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the conservation status of manta rays. Basically, one of our co-founders of MMF in 2003 was assigned by the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, to figure out what the conservation status of manta rays was. And basically, she had to come back and say, we don't know. There's not enough data out there. So this was about 18 years ago. We didn't know enough about manta rays to say anything about what their populations were doing. So manta ray research is pretty new and it's becoming more popular now, but what we've learned has all been very, very recent. That same person, Andrea Marshall, figured out in 2009 that there's actually two different species of manta rays. There's one called the giant manta ray, which are those ones that get really big, 7 to 8 meters across, and they tend to spend more of their time in the open ocean. And there's the reef manta ray, who's smaller and spends more of their time near coast and in reef environments. And so when they were finally able to evaluate their conservation status in 2011, they assessed them as vulnerable to extinction, which means they face a high risk of extinction in the wild, and that if we don't do anything now, they're likely to go extinct in the future. And recently, actually in December of last year, the giant manta ray was reassessed and what we call uplisted, which isn't a good thing, to endangered. It means they're facing an even higher risk of extinction in the wild. So what are the threats to these manta rays? Oh, and I wanted to point out this website if you want to go look at any of the IUCN assessments. It's iucnredlist.org. It's a really fun website where you can type in any animal species, any plant species in the world, and find out what its conservation status is and what its threats are. So some threats to manta rays include entanglement in fishing and mooring lines. So remember I said manta rays have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So if they get entangled in something that doesn't allow them to swim, they will drown. And their cephalic fins are perfect for getting entangled in nets. So if they swim into the net, they can't get out and they'll drown, which is why gill nets can be a big problem. We see them hit by vessels, especially here in Florida. We see a lot of mantas hanging out at areas where there are a lot of boats. Coastal development can affect their habitats. Climate change can affect their food. As the ocean gets more acidic, all of that zooplankton, their shells are made of calcium carbonate, and that dissolves in a more acidic ocean environment. As well as pollution, and specifically MMF, some of our researchers have been looking at microplastics, which are basically if plastic goes into the ocean, the wave energy is going to break it down into these like smaller and smaller pieces of plastic, which are the same size as the food that they eat. So those pieces of plastic will get caught in their gills and they will swallow it. One of our researchers found that in Indonesia, manta rays are likely consuming up to 60 pieces of plastic each hour. So we don't know the full effects of what ingesting all this plastic. It could be toxic to the manta rays. It could prevent them from getting the full nutrition of food, but it's not good, and it's a big problem that we need to work on our plastic consumption. But by and large, the biggest threat to manta ray populations are fisheries, both targeted fisheries and incidental catch as bycatch. So what bycatch means is when you put fishing gear out and catch something you didn't mean to. So they might put a gill net out to catch like some kind of fish, but a manta ray swims into it and they catch that instead, which is bycatch. And manta rays are also targeted in some parts of the world for fish, and they're targeted for their gills in use in traditional Asian medicines. And the reason why fisheries are such a big problem for manta rays is, remember we said that they reproduce very, very slowly. So if they're fished out, and they can be fished out quite easily, because you see when they get all together to feed, if fishermen knows where that's happening, they can go kill all the manta rays in that area, and they reproduce so slowly that they can't replace their population very quickly. All right, enough with sad manta stuff. We'll talk about happy stuff now. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and how I got started. I'm originally from North Carolina, and after getting my undergraduate degree, I spent about 4 years studying sea turtles, either here in Florida or around the world in Central America and Africa. This picture is in Costa Rica, and that's a coati, or in Spanish, pisote, eating turtle eggs. Yeah, so I originally got started with sea turtles, and sea turtles kind of led me to manta rays in a weird way. So I used to work on the sea turtle nesting beaches in Florida, and what I would do every morning is get out on my ATV, and you drive your ATV up and down the beach, and you're looking for sea turtle tracks from the moms who nested the night before. So I was out on the beach all the time. And sometimes I would just look over into the ocean, and I would see these rays, these large rays swimming by in like 3 feet of water. And I was a biologist and a scuba diver, and I had no idea that we had manta rays in Florida, and I couldn't believe it. And when I did research on it, I found out that no one knew anything about the manta rays in Florida. So this is actually a picture of the very first manta ray I saw. I talked someone to taking me out on their boat, and the manta ray did that turnover swimming behavior to me, the very first one I saw, and I was absolutely in love. I had no idea that that could happen. And it's a little sadder now when I look at this photo. I didn't notice at the time is there's this cut in the manta ray. The manta ray is probably entangled in fishing line. But because we didn't know anything about manta rays, I decided to see what was going on with them, and started the Florida Manta Project back in 2016 in collaboration with the Marine Megafauna Foundation. And what we do when we go out for a manta survey, this is actually what we used to do when I started out, is I would stand up on the bow and look for manta rays, because this was the highest position I could find. You really want to get up high so you can look down into the water. Now we've gotten a lot more high tech, and we use drones, which are a complete game changer in research, and I absolutely love them. But what we're looking for are these black shadows. And I like to joke that I've identified every single manta-shaped rock in Palm Beach County, Florida, because back when I was doing it like this, we would stop and look at rocks a lot and be like, is that a manta? We have a couple rocks that I know personally that are manta-shaped. But what you want to look for is that the rock is moving, and look for the cephalic fins are the key to being like, that's a manta ray. So when we find a manta ray, we get in the water with it. We don't do scuba diving. It's all done free diving, because the water's too shallow and the manta rays are too fast to have a lot of gear on. So here's a little video example. Oh, come on.
So that's just a little guy, a little,
Yep.
little one, a little gal.
It's a gal. So,
Oh my God, she's so beautiful.
oh yeah, and I still get very excited, even though I've seen hundreds of manta rays. It honestly absolutely never gets old.
I have a shark voice. It sounds like I'm talking with my puppy. Can be a sawfish or a baby lemon shark, doesn't matter.
I know it's hard to be a professional. So what I did there was I dove down underneath the manta ray, and why I did that is because I wanted to get a photo of their bellies. And each manta ray has a unique spot pattern on their belly. So it's just like a human fingerprint. So we can tell which manta rays are which by getting a photo of this spot pattern. So I actually have a little game here. I don't know if people are in the chat or not, but basically what I do when I get home every day is I have a database of all the manta spot patterns that I've seen. And then we'll take the picture of the new manta we saw and see if it matches any of the other ones. So Annie, maybe you want to play? Do you want to know which one does number one match to?
You know, honestly, it does. It takes you a little while to register.
Yeah.
For it, but yeah, I'm gonna go with B. And I'm
correct.
And I'm noticing because of all these angles, you probably manually have to do this instead of having a computer learn for you.
We do have some computer learning. It's hard to get the perfect photos, especially in my project where the manta rays are a lot more skittish, and we have like a long GoPro pole that like these are nice photos. And they're like swimming right above the sand, and I have to put the GoPro pole under there instead of a lot of other places where it's manta rays at a cleaning station and you can kind of get underneath them and take a picture on scuba. We have machine learning that we're trying to train, but you still need to double check them by eye.
We have Water Witch. They have number 1 is B. Number 2 is C. And number 3, A.
All right, you're hired. That was correct. Yeah, number 1 is a male manta ray named Rocco, who's actually the second manta ray I ever found, and he's missing his tail. He was hit by a boat. Bimini is a female, number 2. And number 3 is Jigsaw. He was a very cool manta that we saw for a couple years. Yeah, so nice work. This is what I do is I stare at manta spots a lot. And I want to make a quick note, especially like that video I showed earlier that was like a friendly manta in the clearest of blue waters. And I have friends who are professional underwater photographers. So this is what I show you guys in my presentations and on my social media a lot. But a lot of days it looks like this. So sometimes the mantas aren't always friendly. Sometimes they want nothing to do with us. Sometimes the water is really nasty and it's hard to see. So I just want to remind you that it's not all clear blue waters and friendly mantas all the time, even though I make it seem like that. Yeah, so we've identified almost 100 individual manta rays over the 5 years of study. And we found that they're all juvenile manta rays. I didn't show you guys this, but how we tell the difference between adults and juveniles is we basically, on the males, we can look at the size of the claspers, which are their reproductive organs. If they're really small, they're juveniles. If they're really large, they're adults. And we also see a lot of fishing line entanglement here in our Florida study site. The fishing line entanglement can manifest itself in different ways. If you look at the top left, it's got monofilament trailing off its right pectoral fin, and this monofilament on the left was actually all the way through the manta's gills. And this bottom left picture is a female manta ray, and we saw her with fishing line wrapped around one of her cephalic fins. This picture was taken in 2019. We saw her again in 2020, and she had completely lost this cephalic fin. It's not there anymore. So this is probably going to affect her ability to feed, possibly communicate with other manta rays. And in this picture on the right, this manta also has a couple different pieces of fishing line on it and a shark bite as well. But if you look at this piece of fishing line on the bottom, you can see how it's begun to cut into the manta ray's body. And what typically happens, what we see here in Florida, is that mantas are mostly accidentally hooked by fishermen. From a study we did, they kind of swim into the lines that are set. And so the fishermen a lot of times don't have tackle strong enough to land the manta. So usually they cut the line or the line breaks. And so if they have a really long piece of fishing line behind them, when they do that barrel roll feeding that we saw before, the line gets wrapped around their body and it'll cut these V-shaped notches into their body, which we see fairly frequently. I want to show you guys a video of me removing fishing line from a manta. Remember when I said they have really big brains? So keep in mind when you're watching this, because this manta ray swam underneath me for a full hour, letting me dive down multiple times. It was one of the coolest experiences.
Now, Jessica, are you reading the manta ray's behavior and making sure that it's not stressed when you're doing this?
Nice job, Jessica.
Yeah, basically, I was very excited. Yeah, if they don't want anything to do with you, they will swim away. She wasn't feeding or anything. She was making the choice to swim right underneath us. And after I cut that away, she swam off. And
So smart.
we saw that manta ray a couple times after that, and she was always a pretty friendly manta ray. They do have like personalities. Some just never want anything to do with us. We just get the picture and leave them alone. And some, this one was named Stevie Nicks, was always pretty friendly and curious towards us. And we also see a lot of boating interactions with manta rays. And we see them hit by boats fairly frequently. But manta rays heal from their injuries really fast. So we think we're underestimating the amount of injuries we see. But we're going to be working with boaters. We've made some educational videos to try to tell them to look up, maintain awareness of, and look for feeding mantas on the surface. So what all this means, what we found so far, the fact that we're seeing all juvenile manta rays here in Florida, is that this is likely a manta ray nursery ground, which just means it's a developmental habitat where babies can safely grow. And manta rays were listed under the Endangered Species Act in 2018. And we're working with the federal government, NOAA, to help understand which habitat is critical to their survival. And this nursery habitat is likely a really important place where they can develop safely into adulthood. And here is all of our social medias and the website, marinemegafauna.org. You can sign up for our newsletter there. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'm happy to answer questions, and I have a fun drone video of feeding manta rays that I just like to play sometimes. Manta rays aren't swimming this fast. It's a 10-minute video I scrunched into 1 minute, but it's kind of fun to watch.
Thank you so much for that. I learned a lot, and I hope that our viewers are too. Just kind of repeat what Jessica said. I'm happy to, have her answer questions. We can just use that Q&A box. And I'll be, continuously checking it until we're through. Before I ask specific questions with your talk, while we're waiting for others to develop their questions, so one question we like to ask all of our presenters is, well, this one's gonna be a little obvious, but like, what is your favorite shark and why? So maybe it's the more like, what's the most of the why of why you probably love mantas?
Yeah, no, it's mantas, hands down. I fell in love with them the first time I saw them. It's when it's so rare for like a shark or a ray or really any kind of fish to like choose to interact with you or to like be curious about you and check you out. And the fact that like manta rays will flip upside down and you see them looking at you is just, it's a cool experience. And yeah, they're just awesome.
Great. Water Rich wanted to say thank you so much for the interesting information, and that mantas are very neat. Through the talk, so you mentioned that you see a lot of juveniles. Throughout Florida, is there maybe different habitats where the adults are, or does Marine Megafauna Foundation actively looking for adults?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So here in South Florida, so about, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Florida, but our study area is basically in Martin and Palm Beach counties. And we also get reports from down to Fort Lauderdale, Miami, but I've never gotten a report of adult manta ray down here in South Florida that we can confirm.
And so that's all along the East Coast, like before we get to the Gulf Stream.
Coast. It seems to be kind of similar in the Gulf of Mexico. Sightings don't seem to be as common, but the ones I get, they usually seem to be pretty small. But up off the coast of Central Florida, there is a seasonal adult population that just comes in for a couple of weeks each year. They're well known by the cobia fishermen. Cobia are a game fish that will often, there's actually a cobia in one of my videos that I showed earlier. Sometimes they'll be with manta rays. We don't really see them with the juvenile manta rays here in South Florida, but fishermen know that cobia associate with the manta rays, and they go out looking for mantas to find the cobia. And we're actually starting a project up in Central Florida this year to see if those adult manta rays are showing reproductive behavior, are feeding, and we're going to work with some of the professional fishing guides to learn from them and see what some of the effects of the fishery might be.
Very cool. Has your organization or others looked at movement of manta rays through telemetry or other tools that we use to study the movement of marine animals?
Yes, so we have put about 6 satellite tags out on the juvenile manta rays. There's one, we put a spot tag on one that we have on one of our websites. It's in one of our press release stories. But this manta ray, we had a tag on it for about 2 months, and it went all the way up the coast to Daytona Beach, Florida, and then traveled all the way back down to Miami, and then kind of hung out where we tagged it. So they're using the entire coast of Florida, but are maybe showing preference to some areas that they like a little better. So
yeah, that's like 150 to 200 miles. That's a lot. That's a lot of flapping.
Yeah, so I mean, possibly they're using the Gulf Stream to kind of carry themselves up there. We have acoustic tags on manta rays right now, and we're doing a study which will give us better, finer spatial data, but that's
Very
still
cool.
beginning stages.
All right, I have 2 or 3 more questions depending, but so the cephalic fins, the ones that were used for potential communication and rolled up maybe to be more hydrodynamic when they're done feeding, is that and they're a newer elasmobranch, only being 5 million years old, was that right? Is this a new adaptation or is this a modification to a fin that a shark would have?
No, it's a new adaptation, and you can kind of see it in some of their closely related, like the cownose rays are pretty closely related to manta rays, and while they have more like cephalic lobes than full fin, but it's similar. And there's about, they keep changing the taxonomy, 9 species now of mantas and mobulas, and they all have these cephalic fins.
Cool. My last question was, I noticed a lot of the pictures, and maybe I just missed it, but they seem to be a lot of female. Do you know what the ratio is out there, or is that something that's still being studied?
The last time I looked at it, it's been about 50-50.
Okay, half female, half male.
Females and males, which is kind of another indication of what you usually see in like developmental habitats a lot. There's not any sexual segregation going on.
Cool. Well, that was all of my questions. We don't have any new ones. Just thank you so much for your time today and for teaching us about these Jossum manta rays. And please, everyone else, we have other webinars. This one will be up on YouTube shortly, but there are plenty. You can either look at our website or our Sharks for Kids YouTube channel, that they're all available. So thank you again, Jessica.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.